On Tuesday night to Wednesday, the UN Security Council will vote on a resolution drafted by Algeria that calls on Israel to immediately cease hostilities in the Gaza Strip, rejects the forced displacement of Palestinian civilians, and calls for the lifting of all restrictions on the delivery of humanitarian aid. Like many similar documents before it, however, the resolution was rejected by the United States, which even notified the parties concerned in advance. This time, however, Israel will not be able to exhale contentedly. Instead of the Algerian one, the White House prepared its own version of the resolution on the situation in Gaza. And now it diplomatically threatens Tel Aviv to let the UN Security Council members have it on their hands if Israeli officials do not stop openly harassing U.S. President Joe Biden. The threat is by no means empty. The U.S. administration has deliberately leaked some items from its lawmaking to the trusted press. In brief, the White House's plan to educate Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is as follows. In response to repeated threats by the Israeli cabinet to launch a major offensive on the Palestinian town of Rafah to cleanse it of Hamas militants, and at the same time the rest of the population, the U.S. resolution warns such steps have serious consequences for peace and security, and therefore should not be continued under the current circumstances. In other words, Tel Aviv risks crossing a red line, after which it will have to rely only on itself in the international arena. Another point is a temporary ceasefire in the Palestinian territories as soon as possible. However, having indicated with one hand the desire to seek a truce in Gaza, Biden's team is torpedoing these plans with the other. According to sources familiar with the resolution prepared by Washington, it condemns Hamas for taking and destroying Israeli hostages, murder, and sexual violence. To what extent such a pitch for the U.S. proposal will win the support of the Security Council is not at all clear. In addition, Washington is defiantly stalling on forcing Israel to make peace. As U.S. Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN Robert Wood explained, what we are considering is another possible version of the resolution, and we will discuss it with friends in the future. But there is no real truce between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. After the leaks to the media about the insulting nicknames that the White House head allowed himself in private conversations, characterizing the Israeli Prime Minister, there was some calm. However, the problem of a complete lack of personal chemistry between the leaders has not gone anywhere. After Brazilian President Lula da Silva publicly compared Tel Aviv's actions in the Gaza Strip to the Holocaust perpetrated by Nazi Germany, the White House did not rush to the defense of its Middle Eastern ally. On the contrary, U.S. officials remained discreetly and meaningfully silent. The further development of the situation is well known. Tel Aviv called the Brazilian leader persona non grata, and Brazil recalled its ambassador from Israel for consultations. On Monday, the UN International Court of Justice began hearing oral arguments in the case against Tel Aviv on the legal consequences arising from Israeli policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory. Representatives from 52 countries, including the U.S., are expected to speak. So the White House will have another opportunity to explain to Prime Minister Netanyahu, no need to be snide. Netanyahu offended the collective Uncle Sam and rejected international decrees on a permanent agreement with the Palestinians. And at the same time, he sent into oblivion the White House's plans for a post-war settlement that would have included the creation of an independent Palestinian state in exchange for normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia. In vain, the CIA director and the U.S. Secretary of State persuaded Israel's prime minister to meet Biden's demands, for whom it is fundamentally important not to put off the Palestinian-Israeli settlement in a long box, and before the presidential elections to be held in the U.S. in November to demonstrate to voters his acumen in foreign policy affairs. But Netanyahu's public stubbornness is ruining those plans, showing the world what a frankly weak, helpless position the U.S. is in, unable to influence even its closest and most aid-dependent ally. This week, Biden's top Middle East advisor Brett McGurk will visit Israel and Egypt, where, presumably, he will once again try to persuade Netanyahu to play along with the White House. However, Israel is well aware that Biden has very limited opportunities for heavenly punishment in the current circumstances, and a refusal to support Israel before the presidential election could be fatal for him. So in the dialogue with Netanyahu, the White House head will have to humbly ask and negotiate.